God eftermiddag och välkomna till Nya utrikespolitiska samfundets diskussion om opinionsläget i Ryssland. Nu måste jag dessvärre inleda med en liten förklaring här. Här bredvid mig sitter ambassadör René Nyberg och inte Anna-Lena Laurén. Hon blev kallad i egenskap av korrespondent att resa till Ukraina. Hon for dit igår och kan alltså inte delta i den här sändningen såsom debattör. Men hon har lovat att hon ska försöka ringa från Ukraina om hon finns på ett ställe där det går att ringa ifrån, så att vi kanske får höra hennes röst här ikväll, nu på eftermiddagen i alla fall. Men René Nyberg, ambassadör, mycket känd för medlem i utrikespolitiska samfundet och tidigare ambassadör i Moskva och Berlin och så vidare. Jag har lovat ställa upp istället. In Moscow we have Andrej Kolesnikov, as has been you have been told in the invitation, and I'm not going to introduce him in a very long terms. He's working at the Carnegie in Moscow, and you have seen his CV, and he has in the last month, I would say, in the last 2 months, published a series of very interesting articles for Carnegie about the opinion situation in Russia in relation to the Navalny case and in general also. So let us start with that, even if there are more burning issues now, Ukraine and Navalny is also in the headlines. But let's start anyway with the opinion. Would you, Andrej, explain or make a summary of your, let's say, findings based on the Levada opinion or opinion polls? How have the Russians, the general opinion in Russia, reacted towards the latest, let's say, news about not only Navalny but also in general to the foreign policy of Russia in these days? So please, Andrej, welcome to the transmission here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you in a distanced way. Can I use a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, you can.
Some diagrams. I will open the file. So
well, technically it should be possible. So
here it is. Do you see it?
Here we see it.
You see.
Why the Kremlin is winning the battle for
Yeah.
the average Russian. Yes.
Yeah, I have longer presentations, shorter presentations. This is a short one, which is concentrated strictly on public opinion issues. And the headline is about an average Russian, which is the main player in the political field, because this very indifferent average Russian influences the political situation. This average Russian is a consumer of goods, a consumer of political information, consumer of everything. And the political opposition, civil society, Kremlin, they're all struggling for this average Russian and his sympathy, trying to make him a supporter of the state from the one end, and the supporter of the civil society from another angle. So we can pay attention to the main player today in the political field. I mean, Aleksej Navalnyj, who is detained, who is imprisoned, who is right now in a stance of a hunger strike. So you know for sure a lot of details about January and February protests in Russia. They were quite significant, but According to the polls of Levada Center, which has a basis of these graphics, Navalny has a lot of problems from the point of view of public opinion, paradoxically, because of this intransigent and all Russia protests. This is more about psychology of average Russians. They are perceiving Navalny as a person who is the messenger of bad news about the state, bad news about corruption. And because of that, there are some losses in Navalny's approval rating. The rating of disapproval of his activity has grown from 50% in September 2020 to 56% in January 21. This is not simply a statistical mistake. This is quite serious. What is concerning his rating of trust, it was growing, but only for 1%. So the cost of it was extremely high. His health, his freedom, his infrastructure, his headquarters also have a lot of problems, and no reaction from the mass public opinion. I don't take here the attitudes of civil society, which is much more plausible, much more active in terms of support of Navalny, but we must differ. Simpler society, which is quite passive and indifferent, and civil society, which is active and which is ready to support Navalny protests, etc., etc. So some more words about this very average Russian citizen. He or she is primarily a conformist, which is supporting the power because this is power. This is authority which has money, which can feed him, which can assist him in hard situations. It doesn't mean that there are a lot of fierce supporters of Putin among this group of people, but the indifference, this is one of the main safeguards of the Putin system. They support Putin because he is at the very top of the power hierarchy. And in the case if Navalny could be the president of this country, they could support Navalny, for instance. It doesn't matter for them who is the object of this support. And one more detail. All these people, they are not express total content with the situation in Russia. They can express discontent, but they support people, they support protests which are not too close to Navalny. Navalny, this is the symbol of a special kind of protest, a protest with a political content, with a political sense. And you can see that people have supported protests in Khabarovsk to much extent if we compare it to the protests which were marked by Navalny. It means that Russians, average Russians, they see Navalny somebody who is the agent of, I don't know, the West, CIA, special services, etc., etc. And they express more sympathy to protest without Navalny, even without the leader, just like in Khabarovsk last year. I must say that protests in Khabarovsk reactivated the last weekend. Few words about Putin and his popularity among Russians and the factors which were decisive in terms of support of Putin. You can see some critical junctures in Putin's approval rating. This is the rating of Levada Center, the main independent pollster. And this is answer to the question, do you approve the activity of the President Vladimir Putin? And only two events which are not political and in some sense even not economic ones, influenced the approval rating of Putin in terms of deterioration of these ratings. The first point was 2 years ago in the year 3 years ago in the year 2018. This is the raising of the retirement age, so-called pension reform. It was a violation of unwritten social contract between the population and the authorities. Because this is a social contract like this: we are voting for you, but you, the authorities, you don't touch our social benefits, which are inherited from the Soviet times. And the second problem for Putin was the pandemic. This is more about psycho-emotional problems for Russians. It is not about political system, not about his zeroing of terms of the president. This is simply the problem of mood, the problem of sentiments. And you can see that right now, Putin's rating is at the plateau 65, 64, 66, more or less normal plateau. But we must understand that these indicators are at the level of, at the pre-Crimean level, before the annexation of Crimea, when there was a boost of Putin's rating to 80+%. Why these people are so indifferent and so dependent on the opinion of the authorities? This is all about of very aggressive state interventions in Russia. State is everywhere, in a political sphere, in the sphere of civic activity, but it is also the main economic player. There are a lot of state-dependent people who are working for state. Their working places are in the budgetary system. They're bureaucrats. They are Siloviki or somebody else. And one of the main indicators of the state dependence is the structure of real incomes of Russians, and this structure is not so healthy as in the West. I mean that here is a great decrease of the incomes from the business activity, 10% from the year 2000 to the year 2020. Only 5% in the structures. These are the incomes from the entrepreneurial activity. Very low figure, and this is all about private sector, about small and middle-sized businesses, which are in a great trouble, and it demonstrates the scale of the state interventions into economy. And one more point in the structure of these real incomes, very visible growth of so-called social payments, which are now higher even than in the Soviet Union. The next slide. Frequently asked question about the youth, generational shift, the capacity of new generations to change the situation in Russia. You can see here that really the cohort from 18 years old to 24 years old, these people have a little bit another kind of vision of the world and understanding of different events in Russia. If we'll take such an indicator as an attitude for the future of Vladimir Putin, you can see that younger groups do not support or support to less extent Putin as a future president of Russia. It means that this cohort is another one. They think in another way. The same situation with their attitudes. This is only one more example. There are a lot of examples of this kind. This is an attitude toward people who are participating in the protests in the streets. So you can see that younger generations have a favorable view of the opposition protests. This is also a significant story, but there are some details in that sense, and the generational shift can't automatically change the situation in the country and average public opinion in the country, because there are a lot of young people who want to make careers, normal careers inside the system, and a lot of them are becoming, for instance, joining the roles of the army, special services, of FSB, procurator offices, etc., etc. This is very popular career trajectory to be inside this community, the community of so-called siloviki. They have understandable career trajectories, and they have understandable salaries, and they are joining the roles of the middle class, for instance. And the second point in that sense is that there are a lot of young people who are ready to join the bureaucracy. It's quite fashionable right now to work for the state, again, having understandable career trajectories and normal salaries, joining at the same time the same middle class. And the sense of the future political processes in Russia is the battle for the next generation, because Putin has a lot of different instruments which are adapted to the younger generations. He can attract their attention. His favorite word right now is volunteers. He's supporting volunteer activity, paying presidential grants, etc., etc., and initiating different organizations which can attract the youth in the roles of the supporters of Putin. Let's take, for instance, an example of so-called Yunarmia, which is kind of a militarized organization for teenagers, which is more or less popular and unites a lot of young people. But at the same time, there are a lot of, as we see, according to the sociological polls, there are a lot of people who do not support this kind of powers, this kind of authoritarian authority. And this is really more about the battle between modernization of the country, and the agents of these modernizations are among people who are so young, and archaization of the system. I think that the process of modernization is inevitable, and the society in Russia is urbanized and well-educated, and it must be the agent of changes. But at the same time, this is really such a situation of balance between archaic way of thinking, archaic way of ruling the country, and normal values, not simply liberal values, but values which are typical for urbanized, well-educated, young education of Russia. The aged population in Russia prevails, and because of that, there are some problems with this balance of ages inside the society. And aged generation still prevails during the electoral campaigns. And because of that, if we are talking about, for instance, future parliamentary elections, I'm sure that the system will be the same, and the same party, United Russia, will be the main beneficiary of these elections, despite some losses in its popularity. This is all because of the fact that younger generations, they do not attend any kind of elections. So in that sense, conformists are coming to the polling stations and aged people prevails during the electoral campaigns. So we will not see any kind of serious changes in the year 2021, maybe even during the presidential elections of 2024. But at the same time, this process of slow modernization of Russia is coming all the time. This is a permanent process and inevitable process. And in that sense, something must happen in the future that can change Russia and that can initiate the process of moving from authoritarian regime to more democratic regime. On this more or less optimistic point, I will stop myself.
For this presentation, and you could see the numbers. One can, of course, wonder about the time span. If the young generation is becoming more conservative during the next 10 years, then there is not much hope for a real change. René, what is your comment to these numbers?
Thank you very much, Andrej. This was a highly interesting way of painting the picture. I like the expression of conformism. That is, people are careful. They don't take risks. They don't like protests which they consider to be I'm sorry, I missed my camera. They don't like protests which they esteem to be a kind of upsetting the society. They do support people who are protesting, like in Khabarovsk, for a real cause which they can also personally relate to. I think that one of the important points you made is the growing role of state. That is, a larger part of the economy is state controlled, if not state owned, and this creates a situation where people are dependent on the state. They are, as the Russian expression "budgetniki" puts it, they are dependent on their wages and allocations which come from the government. This is, of course, a tendency which, in a way, supports the regime and supports the present policy, but it undermines the economy. And undermining the economy means that it undermines the level of well-being. The salaries paid are not they're losing the living standards are slowly but clearly deteriorating. So isn't this a risky policy by the government, putting everything into the state control? This is, of course, a return to Soviet times. It is. I already seen voices saying that we need a new Gosplan, and there was an idiot who said that we need five-year plans. But these elements of plans, of presidential aims, or a presidential program which has to be fulfilled by year 20-something, are already there. This is undermining the economy, and at the end of the day, undermining the well-being of the population. Now, you didn't say anything about foreign policy, but the isolation of Russia, which is both self-isolation, perceiving Russia as a fortified, as a encircled fort, and the isolation coming with the sanctions from the European Union and the United States. All of these are squeezing Russia. They're squeezing the economy, and they're squeezing the population. How do you see this to play out?
Before I give the floor to Andrej again to answer these questions, and I remind you that you can also send questions to the speakers by using my address pär@stenback.fi. Ni kan alltså skriva frågor och vi tar emot dem här och försöker besvara dem. Andrej, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. René mentioned very important angles of current Russian affairs, current Russian problems. Yes, the perception of this deteriorating economic situation is very different because any worsening of the situation people are perceiving as a new normal. Yes, the situation is not so good, but it is not so bad, and maybe it could be worse if we will appeal to the government using such a tool as protests. It will not help us. People do not believe in the efficiency of any kind of protests, not to mention economic protests. And the economy is not the incentive to go to the streets for these people. Yes, there are some examples of labor protest strikes or something like that, but this is not too serious, and this is not the main problem for the regime, which can pour money to this or that point and solve the problem, because the budget is not in such a trouble that the government can't solve right now nearly any problem with this or that socially deteriorating situation in different geographical points. And yes, even the system of social payments is not so good as it is chaotic. But at the same time, from time to time, Putin is trying to buy the loyalty, making some additional payments, and I'm sure tomorrow when he will have his State of the Union, let's say, address, the address to the parliament, he will prepare some new additional payments to different categories of poor people. And this is all about buying loyalty, political loyalty. In that sense, we can't predict whether the situation in the economy can have a decisive influence on the behavior of people. They prefer to survive until now. They prefer to get.
It's a very slow movement.
Slow movement.
It's kind of a zastoi, that which was the expression before perestroika. But it is a slow movement which doesn't really create upset things. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. This is right word. I mean, zastoi, a lack of any move. This is a bad balance, yes, but nevertheless, psychologically, people are not ready to fight for a new political force, for a new power. And they don't have additional menu of new political parties because everything is under control. If you want to have some payments, some assistance from the state, you will vote for the same United Russia party. If you want to express your discontent, you will vote for the Communist Party, for instance, without any visible impact on your incomes, salaries, etc. At the same time, several years ago, military victories, foreign policy victories, some very effective demonstrations of force and demonstrations of fear. I mean, that Russian authorities and Putin, the cornerstone of the system is to some extent fear of Putin's force, including military force and foreign policy capabilities to do something with the West, etc., etc. It created a kind of a respect from average Russians to the authorities. But this is a story about the period of several years ago. After the pension reform, after the year 2018, any military victory can't mobilize people for additional rally around the flag. It's absolutely impossible.
Interrupt you here and say that, would you feel that there is a need for some foreign policy, let's say advancement or military in the situation? Could Putin tomorrow, for example, say that he is going to do something in that, and we see now on the Ukrainian border? Is the situation such one that he would need a boost through activism in the foreign policy and military field?
Yeah, no, in that context, I suppose that the new war, I mean, hot war, for instance, not hybrid information war with Ukraine and literally with the West, because Ukraine is simply a pen name of the West for Russians. This kind of hot war can't mobilize people. They don't want to participate in a real war. They prefer, let's say, television war, sitting on their sofas and watching TV. This war is more or less acceptable for Russians, but not a real war. They're not ready to send their children to fight with Ukrainians or NATO troops or something like that. And, I would say that Crimean consensus is still workable, and people are supporting the annexation of Crimea until now. But this is, let's say, cold consensus. It is not hot as it was in the year 2014 and 2015, when there was such a patriotic wave, such a compassion, such a support of Putin. Right now, this is cold consensus. Yes, we agree with it. We are Russians. We prefer to live like this, but at the same time, give us something else. It doesn't help us to survive economically, to survive hard times in the social sphere. So, and because of that, I was sure from the very beginning of this escalation of the situation at the Ukrainian border that it is more about public relations than about real war. But at the same time, any military or technological or technical mistake could ignite the fire of war occasionally, accidentally. And because of that, it was also very dangerous to initiate this kind of escalation.
Saying is actually that we saw the war already. We saw it on TV, and there won't be a kinetic war. There won't be a shooting war. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
Two questions here coming in. Can I, let's see what there is. As the regime enjoys the strong conformist support, why is it so sensitive about any form of criticism? If it feels safe, in a way, you see the numbers, it can feel safe. So how is it pride or hurt feelings of Mr. Putin, or what is the reason for those, let's say, rather brutal reaction to criticism?
It's several years ago we could talk about Russian model as a hybrid authoritarianism with some elements of democracy and some tricks, some plays, gamble with the opposition and civil society, etc., in more or less peaceful way. Right now, this is a full-scale authoritarian regime, very repressive, with the authoritarian legislation, with some new laws about foreign agents, about education. The new law on the enlightenment process is very repressive. So in the nearest future, some organizations who are involved in the process of lecturing, discussions, etc., they will have to coordinate their activity with the Ministry of Education. It's absolutely impossible to imagine how to to implement this kind of legislation. Yes, it will be the selective implementation, but nevertheless, there are a lot of problems in a normal life for the civil society. This is one point, the very nature of this regime. And the second point is that their main enemy is Navalny. They tried to find a way to solve the problem of Navalny once and for all. And they decided to poison him, and they failed. But right now, they invented a new way of solving this problem. They decided to consider Navalny's structures, infrastructure of his headquarters, his organizations, as extremist organizations. In that case, if you are participating in the meetings or demonstrations for Navalny, mentioning Navalny, you are an extremist as well. And you can be persecuted by the police and any other Siloviki organization. If you are spreading the information in the internet and social media about Navalny, you are also an extremist. And this is all about a bunch of people. A lot of people could be considered as extremists if they mention Navalny, participating in Navalny, let's say, events, etc., etc. You can participate in the protests of another kind. In Khabarovsk, for instance, if you're mentioning Sergei Furgal, the arrested governor of Khabarovsk region, so you're not an extremist. If you're participating in the same kind of protest in Moscow and St. Petersburg, mentioning Navalny, you could be the extremist. So in that sense, the cruelty of the regime is provoked by Navalny.
Can I just, Andrej, stop you there? And there are two aspects. One is the life of Navalny. If it's in danger, we know that his health is deteriorating. There's a risk of his death. And then the second thing is that tomorrow Putin will speak at noon, and at 1700 hours. There will be a support meeting, support demonstrations for Navalny in I'm sure in Moscow, I'm sure in St. Petersburg, but also in several other cities. Are the authorities ready to lock up hundreds of people?
They're ready.
They're ready.
They're ready to lock up. They're ready to block the Kremlin, I don't know, Lubyanka Square, the center of the city. And, you know, during the whole day, I'm sure that Moscow will be at the center of West City without any kind of normal dwellers, inhabitants, because we will have the first half of the day, the State of the Union address, and then we will have another kind of address, which is also a message to people from the intransigent political opposition. And we can compare these two messages.
There is a question. We have received a question from the listeners that if this is happening as the Navalny's organizations are declared as terrorist organizations and extremists, should we expect that some people will start to emigrate from Russia, or will they go into hiding, or will they leave politics and be quiet? What would be the? I mean, it's a small young elite, but nevertheless, it's an important for the future of Russia. What will happen to them?
It's a very good question, because this is kind of an impasse for a lot of people. What to do, how to behave, how to continue, simply to express your own vision. This is a peaceful protest. When Mr. Lavrov, for instance, compares protest of Gilets jaunes in France and protest of Navalny supporters, this is a mistake, because this Gilets jaunes, they are not the supporters of the idea of peaceful protests. But Russian protesters, they are not going to Kremlin in order to take it or to sit there just like at the Capitol Hill. They're simply demonstrating their views because they don't have any other tool to do so. They can't be represented in the parliament because of this very narrow menu of parties and falsifications of the elections. And this is the only way to participate politically in a normal democratic process. What to do? Yes, there is always three options for any person. This is voice, loyalty, and exit, according to the famous theory. You can demonstrate your voice, continue to demonstrate your voice. You could be arrested. You could be under persecution. You can express your loyalty and continue your career inside the system, and at the same time thinking something bad about this regime, preparing for future possible changes and modernization of Russia, adapting to the situation. I think the majority will follow this way, simply to live in the country and to follow the laws of the country, but being in a permanent stance of waiting for changes, which must come from somewhere, maybe from the top after the Putin. And the third option is the exit, emigration, even inner immigration into private life. It is equal to the option loyalty. So in that sense, we can predict that the wave of immigration could be higher than now, because a lot of Russians are living abroad as immigrants or simply as inhabitants of different cities. But for the youth, this is a challenge. What to do? And this is a choice whether you will follow the steps of conformists, dreaming about a career of bureaucrat primarily, or worker of the state corporation, or you can join the rows of Siloviki. Another option is to go somewhere else, to get the education of high quality in very few good universities, primarily in Moscow and St. Petersburg, or to immigrate. And I would say that the share of these people is not so high, but maybe they are the best and the brightest. And taking, for instance, my personal situation with my junior son, who is studying physics, and I understand that he must continue his education somewhere in the West as soon as possible, because I can predict the behavior of my authorities in terms of closing borders, opening borders, not in the sense of pandemic, but in a political sense as well. It becomes absolutely unpredictable. But at the same time, the guy like my son, who is strong in mathematics, he can continue his education, for instance, in a new economic school, which is absolutely Western-like university, quite popular among people who want to study economics or something, finances, something like that. But very few people can follow this way. So this is not a proper answer, maybe, but
can I
very briefly, because we have several questions here still. So
well, I wanted to turn back to the political system and the elections. We all know that the elections are a scam. We all know that they will be falsified, and we all know that United Russia will emerge on the top. But you mentioned the Communist Party. Is there a small chance that the Communist Party could become something more than a Zyuganov party? Because now it's a joke. But could you imagine that there would be kind of reformist, social democratic ideas which would challenge the system?
I think they can't challenge the system at all. The party is a little bit less popular right now than the far rightist party of Zhirinovsky, but at the same time, they are still occupying the left flank and the right flank of the political system. There are some more active and really there are some real oppositioners inside the party, but their fate is a little bit uncertain because they could be excluded from the party, expelled from the party because of their activity, and they could be arrested. There were some precedents when the members of the Communist Party were arrested because of their too efficient activity, especially in social media and in the streets as well. Zyuganov is simply the instrument of Kremlin right now, and he's trying to keep this balance between opposition views and conformism, open conformism of Zyuganov. In that sense, it's a logical situation when the rating of Zyuganov was falling down all the time, and now he has the same rating of trust as Navalny, for instance, 4%. Not more. Yes, but he's still the leader. And there are several communist parties with the same, nearly the same titles, which are spoilers. So they can save the situation in terms of too high indicators of the Communist Party, official Communist Party.
I have several questions here. Hoping for or asking for, is there no chance of, let's say, a detente between Russia and the rest of the world or the rest of the West? I said here to René before we started that there must be Putin must be a little bit interested in having a meeting with President Biden, and what could come out of it in the best of scenarios? I mean, I don't speak about a grand deal now, but some kind of let's say, detente who would reorganize the relations. What is your opinion about that? Yeah. And then I ask René to the same question.
Well, I mean, despite everything which is going on,
yes.
Patrushev just spoke with the security policy advisor of President Biden.
Yes.
The military are speaking with each other. Putin will participate in the internet summit on environment. So the contacts are there, and there's no. Although there's a dislike which is palpable, and the rhetoric is harsh, Washington and Moscow are talking to each other.
No wishful thinking, but anyway, let's see. Andrej, what do you think? Is there any chance?
Not in the nearest future, I would say, because we can't even dream about a grand deal, not to mention about reset, rapprochement, détente, all this row of different terms. It's absolutely impossible right now, and I feel a lack of good faith from the Russian side. Absolute unreadiness to do any friendly steps toward the West. The language of hostility, the hate speech, no good faith, no practical steps, only some technical contexts which are extremely important in the situation of a hybrid war and in terms of nuclear non-proliferation. Yes, Putin will repeat all these words like climate change, pandemic, etc., etc. It's absolutely senseless, meaningless. He can deliver a speech about climate change and lecturing the whole world how to manage the problems of climate. not making anything in a domestic sphere in that sense. So, in my opinion, we don't have any kind of foreign policy at the end of the day, because there are some tactical steps, reactions to some steps from the West, always such a defensive position, always hate language, and the face of this diplomacy and foreign policy is Maria Zakharova. She's intervening all the time with this hate speech, and it is a pleasure for her, real human pleasure. So, and Lavrov simply kind of a deputy of Maria Zakharova, who is responsible for negotiations. This is not, it is not a foreign policy in the proper sense of the word. What to do with the United States, what to do with Europe. Putin is simply sitting at the top of a hill.
Mashenka Zakharova is for internal consumption only. This is an important thing. Nobody takes her serious, except that she's constantly on Russian TV. She's the spokesperson of the MID. But if the sieged fortress is a fact, and this is the psychological picture which the government with Mashenka Zakharova is painting. This sieged fortress, isn't this something which disturbs the Russians? The dollar is getting, and the euro are getting stronger and stronger. The ruble is getting weaker and weaker. Traveling will be difficult. And then we have the pandemic. I mean, we all know about Sputnik V, but at the same time we know about excess deaths, and we know that only 6% of the population have been vaccinated, which is one of the lowest vaccination rates in the developed world.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's the measure of the level of trust to the state, because there are two parts in the brains of Russians. Symbolic part supports Putin, our military force, and even Sputnik, the only object of our soft power, not hard power. On the other hand, a lack of trust to any ideas which are coming from the state. Permanent desire to get some money from the state and run away at the same time. So it is more or less a dangerous situation for the state, this level of trust. But at the same time, this is the parts of this picture of bad balance. How to find the exit from the story? People are feeling themselves locked inside the besieged fortress, not only in a military or political sense. What can they do? The answer is nothing. So the only normal way of behavior for an average Russian is to adapt to the situation once more, waiting for something else. And all these average Russians were voting for the zeroing of the presidential terms last summer.
I have one question. Anna-Lena Lorén could not participate, as you realize, but you many of the listeners have seen her book or read her book, and she calls it the velvet dictatorship. And you said in the beginning that it's not a velvet anymore, it is a hard dictatorship. But she has a theory. She says that why are these opinions which we saw here on the screen such ones that the Russians have adopted a attitude of relativism. If it's a bad situation in Russia, well, it can be much worse elsewhere. If we are killing people because of their opinions, they are killing it also in America, and so on and so forth.
What about this?
Relativism is...
What about this?
What about this? Yes, that is another term for the same. So first, it's not a velvet dictatorship anymore. That is one of your conclusions. But what do you say about this relativism, this relativist attitude of your countrymen?
I think this relativism is a normal feature of normal autocrat. I will not use the term dictator, but some of my colleagues are beginning to use this term, dictator. I think, yes, several years ago we could talk about velvet dictator, or like here is such a term in the political science, benevolent dictator, who is solving some problems of people, who is appealing to people. Yes, and Putin is trying to maintain this image of benevolent dictator, and we will see it tomorrow during the State of the Union. He will suggest something to people in a social sense. He will say some words about our success in survival of in overcoming the pandemic, the meaning of Sputnik, the achievement of our science in that sense, etc., etc. But at the same time, he's using repressions. He's creating authoritarian legislation, and this is the situation of law against the spirit of law, let's say, positive legislation against justice and the meaning of law. And he and his colleagues, they are violating the Constitution all the time. The chapter 2 of the Constitution about freedoms, about rights of citizens. So, and they all the time they are appealing to the West. The West is doing the same that we, but in a more cruel manner. Appealing, I have mentioned the story with Gilets jaunes. This is a typical whataboutism, a typical appealing to bad behavior of Westerners. And this strategy is used in the TV propaganda primarily. I think this is more or less efficient. It's like Putin is saying, you know that I know that you are as bad as me, but you are demonstrating your so-called universal values. You are cynical as I am. Let's talk like equal partners about real things, not about these human rights. You will come to me to solve the problems of nuclear non-proliferation. You will come to me to solve the problem of Nord Stream. Let's talk about serious things, not about that Navalny, human rights. This is the problem of our sovereignty. Don't intervene into that and everything will be okay. So here is a full stop of his foreign policy.
Andrej, there's one question which has to be asked, and that is, what happens if they let Navalny die in prison?
It's a so sad story, I would say. I suppose that they are ready for this scenario. Maybe there are some hesitations what to do with Navalny, but they wanted to kill him. Why not to let him die from hunger or some consequences of this poisoning with his health, with the problems with his health? They suppose that it can provoke protests. They are ready to make some preliminary steps. I mean, announcing Navalny's infrastructure as extremist organization. But they are sure that any protests has the beginning and the end. And they hope that even protests which is concerning the possible death of Navalny could be exhausted in several days or weeks. And after that, they can live peacefully.
Yeah, but Andrej, now you're talking about the reactions in Russia. I was thinking about the reactions in the West. The Americans have been very clear the Europeans or the European Union foreign ministers didn't say much. But if he really dies in prison for maltreatment and torture, then there will be reactions. There's no question about that.
Yeah. There will be reaction, but what shall we do? The impact is very bad for the Russian population, for average Russians, and primarily for civil society. Because you know such a special Russian term, bombardment of Voronezh, бомбардировка Воронежа. And Putin won't answer to the West, to one more leader who can name him killer once more. He will answer to the domestic opposition, domestic civil society. He can do something with us. This is a problem. Not to mention that if new sanctions will touch everyday life of Russians, I mean, SWIFT system, MasterCard, Visa, etc., it could be so harmful for a lot of Russians who are using modern technologies in their normal life. Maybe after that, these non-politicized Russians from the middle classes, they can understand what are the consequences of the poisoning and killing of Navalny. Here is the link between Putin's behavior and everyday's life. It is not evident for the majority of the population, but maybe after that, it could be understandable for the majority of the population.
Countries, the business sector would say, now it's enough. We are suffering. We are not going to get any new investments. We are going to face a lot of obstacles on the international market and so on and so forth. But I guess that that's not much. It has not much of saying in the Russian context. There is no real voice of the business sector, the economic sector, of Minister of Finance and so on.
Yeah, the elite and
is the only power ministry in Finland.
Let's not compare anyway.
Our elites are very adaptive, Alice, to the mainstream discourse, adaptive to the circumstances, etc., etc. This is also a problem for us.
Understand. Anyway, I think that we are coming to an end of this discussion, and we are very grateful to you, Andrej, for sharing with us these numbers, even if they are rather pessimistic views, offering pessimistic views. But nevertheless, I think they are based on facts, and in addition, we got your personal opinions on what shall be understood from these numbers. Also thanks to René.
My pleasure.
Och ett tack till alla som har lyssnat på den här. Vi beklagar det att vi inte kunde vara exakt så som programmet utlovade med Anna-Lena Laurén. Men hon är någonstans i Ukraina och tydligen har inte kunnat kontakta oss därifrån, från frontlinjen så att säga. Så får vi höra vad som sker imorgon i Putins tal och fortsättning på den här följetongen. Thank you very much for this, and the meeting is finished.
Thank you, Andrej.
Tack så mycket.